Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
We're going to spend some time today talking about Islam. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation because we bring back to the microphone individual that has been with us many times before, Dr. Jim Denison, has a PhD, and is actually the man who founded the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture, provides cultural commentary, and it is read by so many people, including myself, every single day. He has taught world religions for 25 years in 4 different seminaries, an individual that has been chair of the advisory board for Dallas Baptist University, served on the board for Baylor Healthcare System, and certainly has also taught on the faculty of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and other places as well. It's just a delight always to have you on the program, and today we're going to talk about something we've talked about with you in the past because of your book, Radical Islam, but we also have all sorts of commentaries that you've written in the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture.
So glad to be back with you today, Kerby. Thanks for this privilege.
One of the things I appreciate about your forum is that you address so many different issues. We're just going to be pulling out a few over the last month or so on which you've addressed the issue of Islam, but every single day you sit down and apply biblical principles to that forum. We have on our website a link to the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. I highly recommend it to anybody to make sure that when they get up in the morning, one of the first things they read, if they read this before the Bible or after the Bible, doesn't matter to me, but I think they need to read what you have to say about how we apply biblical principles to these very important issues.
Thank you so much. We're commanded, as you know, to speak the truth in love. And to try to demonstrate the relevance of God's Word to the issues of the day is a great privilege, and that's what our ministry does full-time.
Well, you know, your book, Radical Islam, what you need to know, is something we talked about years ago on the program here. It's amazing it was a couple of years ago, but it really was. And I think it's important to recognize that you will probably want to update the book because of all the things that have been happening. But one of those right now is just the plight of Christians and other people of faith in Muslim countries. One of the pieces you wrote was about a woman stoned to death for marrying a man she loved. We have another woman that might be killed in Sudan because of her faith. We have Pastor Saeed in Iran. I mean, you can go from country to country to country. If it is a Muslim-dominated country, the plight of believers in those countries is very dire, and I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon.
No, in fact, it looks like it's going to get worse. There's been an enormous intellectual battle going on within the Muslim world as regards how to relate to non-Muslims. The one view, the so-called moderate view, is that the parts of the Quran that are conciliatory, the first part of the Quran that says you have your way, I have my way, ought to take precedence over the so-called sword verses that, as you know, come later in the Quran and command Muslims to attack the infidel and to kill the apostate. To the radical Muslim mind, it's the latter part of the Quran that takes precedence over the former. As you know, it's called the doctrine of abrogation, and it's the idea that the later it was inspired, the more authoritative it is. And so there's this growing trend in the Muslim world that the sword verses, Surah 9 and other places in the Quran, really guide Muslims in being aggressive and taking initiative against those who are not Muslims, give them the opportunity to convert, and if they refuse to convert, then they're to be killed. That's a growing ideology in the Muslim world today.
Another part of that, and since we're going to get into Muslim theology, is the idea of dhimmitude, or a dhimmi. That is, they are to feel themselves subdued. So even if they are not threatened by the sword, there has been in the past in Islamic culture, and now it's more sort of de facto, that the value of a Muslim man is greater than a Muslim woman. The value of a Muslim is greater than an infidel or another belief. And so it is really difficult for Christians to live in that culture because they are treated very much as second-class citizens, even if they're allowed to live.
That's exactly right, and that's been the case historically, as you know. From the time Islam began its growth across the Middle East and into Western Europe, you had the opportunity to convert to Islam. If you chose not to do that, then you were required to pay the hijra, the tax, which could be an enormously expensive, exorbitant tax, and you would live as a second-class citizen from that point forward. The word Islam can mean peace. It can also mean submission. And these days, it's the submission side of Islam that is coming really to the front. And you're seeing this in places in the Muslim world that didn't used to be that way. That's clearly the trajectory as you look to the future.
You've traveled to many countries, and let's use a good example. Turkey is a country at one point that Ataturk, the leader there, was really trying to bring Islam kind of into the modern world. And so there was a real possibility that democracy would flourish in Turkey. There was the idea that it could be part of NATO, part of the European Union. Didn't happen in that regard, but still there was a sense in which it was coming into the modern world. Looking at Turkey right now, I think illustrates your point only so well. All it takes is one radical leader to have a much more radical interpretation of the Quran. And thus we see today how dangerous it is really to be a Christian in this country of Turkey right now.
And that's changing. And it's really a tragedy. I was there some years ago, wrote a book on the seven churches of Revelation, got to spend several weeks in Turkey, was thrilled with the people. They were so gracious to me. They so much wanted to be a moderate Muslim state. They wanted to prove that you could be a secular democracy and yet be Muslim. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's now the prime minister of Turkey, has been moving it in a strong rightward direction. I think a meta-narrative phrase really comes to mind here. Nations have an overarching sense of themselves, a meta-narrative, if you will, as George Friedman says. They have a sense of what they're trying to become. I believe the Turkish leaders are trying to reproduce the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
They see themselves as having that opportunity right now to step to the fore and be the leaders of the Muslim world. With events happening in Egypt these days, Egypt for years had been in some ways the leader of at least the Arab Muslim world, if not the larger Muslim world. Now you see a clash between the Persian Empire of Iran, the Ottoman Empire of the Turks, the Pharaonic Empire of Egypt. You see these meta-narratives at play. And Turkey very much, I think, is trying to reproduce that Ottoman Empire, and that's not good news.
A little bit of footnote for people that don't know their history. The Ottoman Empire existed until about World War I. And after the break, we're going to talk about how the Muslim Brotherhood arose, because there was an idea that when you lost that they wanted to establish a caliphate and establish kind of a worldwide Muslim rule. And so we'll understand a little bit more about the Muslim Brotherhood. But a lot of what we're facing today is a desire to go back to what happened before World War I. True?
That's exactly right. In fact, the caliphate, as you say, which was, it's a poor analogy, but in a sense kind of a papacy in Roman Catholicism, in the sense that there's a central leader. That was, according to Sunni Muslims, 85% of the Muslim world, how the Islamic world was to be led, really from Muhammad down to the 20th century. After the Ottoman Empire lost World War I, then the Ataturk, as you say, abolished the caliphate. It would be like abolishing the papacy. And from that time to this, many in the Muslim world, especially those on the more radical side, have seen that as a huge outrage and want to reinstitute the caliphate so that Islam can come to dominate the entire world under the leadership of that caliph. That's very much part of their meta-narrative.
Great historical perspective and a lot of the wisdom we get today from Jim Denison. Dr. Jim Denison with us. We're talking about the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture, and we'll occasionally pick out one of his commentaries that he's written on this, but also commend to you his book, Radical Islam, What You Need to Know. It's part of the Unlocking the Truth series, and this is certainly a very important topic in light of all the things that have been happening. We come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what does the Muslim Brotherhood really believe? Who were some of the founders? How did that influence Egypt? We'll certainly get into things like the Taliban, because we've talked in the past about the prisoner exchange and what that might mean. The Pope himself meeting with a Muslim imam, and also, of course, questions about whether or not our policy on some of these issues is appropriate in light of what we know about radical Islam. So all sorts of conversation we'll have today with Dr. Jim Denison. That will continue right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few years, there have been a number of attacks on our nation's national motto, In God We Trust. Recently, I had Representative Randy Forbes on my program to talk about these attacks and the victories that often we haven't heard about on most of the mainstream media. A few years ago, a bureaucrat at the Department of Veterans Affairs attempted to ban the flag-folding recitations at military funerals. This phrase was considered inappropriate and unconstitutional. May God grant you grace, mercy, and peace. A funeral home was told by government officials they could not even inform the families that they have the option of requesting prayer at the military services performed by the veterans' honor details. The U.S. Mint attempted to remove the inscription, In God We Trust, from the front of the new presidential coin. The traditional inscriptions of E Pluribus Unum and In God We Trust were moved to the edge of the coins. The architect of the Capitol refused a teenager's request that a certificate noting his grandfather's love of God, country, and family accompany a souvenir flag that had been flown over the building. The 17-year-old Eagle Scout was told that the word God could not be put on the certificate because it violated a policy banning religious and political expressions on the certificates. Fortunately, in each of these cases, the policies were changed. Representative Forbes even commented that it was good that people on radio were hearing about these victories because they're rarely reported in the media. He then went on to mention another victory. Last month, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts upheld the constitutionality of the phrase, Under God, in the Pledge of Allegiance. There have been at least 3 failed attempts to challenge Under God in the Pledge. There's sure to be additional challenges, but for now, the phrases like, One nation under God, and In God we trust, appear secure. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Jim Denison with us today as we talk about his book, Radical Islam and the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. We have information about his book, information about his ministry, and most importantly, encourage you to sign up to receive the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. Just before we went to a break, you mentioned in passing, it's probably worth to mention for just a minute, the differences in between different types of Muslims. Most are Sunni Muslims, some are Shiite Muslims. And in the past, we used to say, Dr. Denison, that the Shiite Muslims were more radical, but there are certain groups within the Sunni Muslims that are very radical, which we're going to talk about in just a minute.
That's exactly right. In fact, each of the 19 9/11 terrorists were Sunni, not Shiite. Americans got the impression the Shiites were the more radical because of the Islamic Revolution in Iran back in '79. They remember, of course, the hostages and Ayatollah Khomeini and all of that, but really radicalism runs across the board, unfortunately. So you have these two groups, Sunni and Shia. The Sunni, 85% of the Muslim world, as you know, Kerby, believe that those that followed Muhammad down to the 20th century, the caliphs, were the appropriate leaders of Islam. The other group, the Shiites, say that the fourth caliph, Muhammad, who was Muhammad's son-in-law Ali, was the proper successor to Muhammad and the appropriate, what they would call imam. They would say there were 11 other imams, or 12 in total. They would say the 12th imam disappeared or was occluded in 942 AD, but will return again at the end of history to dominate the world for Islam. They see him as a kind of Muslim messiah. So Shiite means party of Ali. About 15% of the Muslim world believes that. That's primarily in Iran and Iraq and some parts of Turkey and Kurdistan as well. But those are the two major traditions, but both of them can be radicalized and have been.
And one of the things you talk about in your book is the difference between radical Islam and Orthodox Islam. I've had people call in even recently saying, well, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not any of those kind of people. And I try as much as possible to say it, but let me say it one more time. Not all Muslims are radicals. Not all Muslims are terrorists. But sadly, almost all terrorists are Muslims. So what is the thing that seems to differentiate the two? That's a whole chapter in your book, but see if you can summarize that.
I'll do my best. That's the great question for today. There are 5 pillars of Islam that, as you know, all 1.6 billion Muslims believe. The witness, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, praying 5 times a day, making pilgrimage to Mecca, fasting during Ramadan, and giving at least 2.5% of your goods to the poor. Those are called the 5 pillars of Islam. Radical Muslims adopt 2 additional tenets. The first is that Islam has been attacked by the West since the Crusades. For 1,000 years now. They see the West as oppressing the Muslim world. They see us as oppressing them by supporting Israel, by our military actions in the Middle East and so forth. Well, the Quran requires Muslims to defend Islam from attack. Surah chapter 2, verse 190. So they believe that they are defending Islam by attacking us. The second tenet is that because we are democracies where we elect our leaders, where our children, grandchildren serve in the military, there are no innocent victims in the West. They look at you and me the way you might look at Germans who supported Hitler or Japanese who supported the emperor. As a result, 9/11 is not an unprovoked attack on innocent Americans. 9/11 is a defense of Islam, striking back at the heart of Western crusader imperialist aggression, the Twin Towers financial, the Pentagon military, the White House political. So to a radical Muslim, every person in the West must be attacked because they are complicit in this attack on Islam. According to the Gallup organization, about 7% of the Muslim world has been so radicalized. Doesn't mean 7 out of every 100 Muslims we know has been radicalized. The percentage would be much higher in Yemen or in Saudi Arabia. It'd be much lower in Indonesia. But according to Gallup, worldwide about 7% would subscribe to these 2 radical Muslim tenets. One other fact very quickly, according to Gallup, 50% of the radicalized Muslims say they are willing to die in defense of Islam.
Yeah.
That would equate to something like 112 million potential suicide bombers.
That's just amazing. That's
Even if
just
that number is 10
overwhelming.
times too high, it would be a remarkably staggering number of people.
It certainly would. Which brings me now to the conversation we were going to have just a minute ago, and that is about the Muslim Brotherhood. And that certainly have to talk about Hassan al-Banna, and some people like that. And you even have a book for one of the individuals that was certainly key to that. And I think it's important to recognize that even if they aren't radicalized in the sense that they're violent, they recognize that a cultural jihad can be a way in which they can still achieve the same end. So explain some of that, if you might.
Thank you. Be glad to do that. In the early part of the 18th century, a man named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab was born. Wahhabi Islam comes from him. He was born in the Arabian Peninsula. He came to believe that the West was attacking Islam and that Islam must return to a puritanical, original kind of form of Islam it had in the first 100 years. His followers became known as Wahhabi. They aligned themselves with the House of Saud, which eventually became Saudi Arabia. And in gratitude, the House of Saud made Wahhabi Islam the official form of Islam in Saudi Arabia. Well, in 1928, an offshoot of Wahhabi Islam was started in Egypt called the Muslim Brotherhood, founded by a school teacher named Hassan al-Banna. They were pledged to the overthrow of the Egyptian government, believing that any government that is not governed on strict Sharia lines is not truly a Muslim government. The Muslim Brotherhood was behind the assassination of Anwar al-Sadat because he negotiated peace with Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood, as we know, was the only organized group on the ground when Mubarak was overthrown and when elections were held. And so, of course, they won elections. But very quickly, Mohammed Morsi was proven to be himself a dictatorial sort of figure. And so now he was overthrown by the military, and now Sisi is the new prime minister or president, and we'll see how all of that goes. But as you say, Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas or Hezbollah or these various groups have militant wings in a military sense, but they're also about a kind of jihad that's cultural. They do education, they do latchkey programs, they do after-school care. They're about building playgrounds and doing things to win the hearts of the Muslim world and the larger world through their benevolence as well as their militant actions. But all of that's toward the same purpose, which is to dominate the world for Islam.
You know, and I think it's a good illustration of how we might be deceived, because the director of intelligence for this country a while back, basically, if I can paraphrase him, said that Really, the Muslim Brotherhood is kind of like the Chamber of Commerce, because they look at those individuals and they say, well, they're not violent, although I think now we've seen the stripes a little bit more. But at the time, the argument was they are very different than the other kinds of Muslims, but they're using a cultural jihad or a civilization jihad, as it's sometimes called, to bring about the same end. What the end is they want to reestablish that caliphate. They would like to implement Sharia law around the world, but they believe that they might be more successful at the ballot box than with bullets and swords.
At least until they can use the ballot box to get control. Because to a radical Muslim, democracy is heresy. Why would you want the laws of men when you have the laws of God?
Yeah.
So you use democracy to get elected. After Hamas was elected in 2006, there have been no further elections in the Gaza. And so you have this situation where they want to use Western tools to accomplish a level of influence that they can then use to establish this global caliphate or this global Islamic kind of state, using our tools to accomplish their purposes.
So again, just a good idea of how we need to understand this. And sadly, Dr. Denison, it seems to me that we have maybe an administration right now that does not understand the nature of radical Islam and the belief that if they are not shooting at us, they are moderates and they are our friends. And I think our foreign policy needs to maybe be informed by some of the things in your book.
Well, thank you for that. That's a concern I have as well. Over the years, as you see administrations change, they all have different purposes, have all different meta-narratives, as it were. And the Obama administration wanted to rebuild relations with Russia, with the Muslim world, wanted to reestablish a better kind of an understanding together. But when you do that, you have to understand what their larger purpose is. And their larger purpose is not peace with America. The larger purpose is global domination, at least for a radical Muslim.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with Dr. Jim Denison. His book is Radical Islam. We have information about that on our website. We have a link to his website as well, denisonforum.org. And let me again encourage you to go to his website and get the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. But as we come to the end of our fiscal year, we really are encouraging you to help us end this fiscal year on a strong financial footing. Here's Dylan McCabe to talk about that more.
When a person has faith in God and believes he is responsible to him, that faith
commentary, and we are glad to send that to your inbox if you'd like to get a copy of it. Of course, you can also find it there and click on it to share it on your Facebook page or Twitter page. That's a good way to get some information out to others and to really start a conversation. So we make that available to you right again at our website, pointofview.net. And of course, we have a take action section that we encourage you to take action on, and we've given you some, if you will, marching orders and some action items that you can take. And of course, we have a video that goes along with that as well. So just a lot of things that we try to cover every single day here on Point of View. And I hope that you'll also consider what you might do to support this ministry. Right now, we're asking some of you that maybe have never given before to consider even a small gift of $5. Just a way to say, I appreciate what you're doing. I listened to the program. I've never given before. And I thought it would be a way to send at least a little bit of support, and that was something that we wanted to encourage you to do as well. We've had a very good response from many of you that have actually done that, but for many of you that have been listening for some time, perhaps even you're a new listener, you would like to participate in that. We give you that opportunity at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jim Denison and also give you a chance to join the conversation. All sorts of very important issues coming up, and you can find all of it at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back again with Dr. Jim Denison, and if you would like to join our conversation in the future, we'll certainly give you that opportunity. Today we're doing kind of a teaching time, so won't be taking phone calls, but if you want to interact with him, we do provide a link to his website, and I do encourage you to go to the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. We've been talking about these various groups. There's one other I might put on the table at least, and that is the Taliban. We've learned a great deal more about them because we had this prisoner exchange with Sergeant Bergdahl. My concern is not so much foreign policy, but just the mindset of a typical Muslim, Jim, and that is we are dealing with a group of individuals in a religious, political setting that perceive weakness. And if indeed we trade 5 Taliban killers who were in Guantanamo for 1 American, if we oftentimes apologize, there is a mindset in Islam that maybe we in the West do not understand that respects strength and disrespects weakness and perceives diplomacy as a weakness and an opportunity for them to get an advantage. Is that true?
I believe that's absolutely true. One thing we have to bear in mind in thinking about Islam is that Islam begins on the Arabian Peninsula, where for 1,000 years prior to Muhammad there was a tribal culture. And in that tribal culture, you didn't have any national police force. You didn't have any ability to protect yourself except within your own family or your own tribe. So tribal warfare became basic to the culture, to really the DNA of that worldview. And from then till now, there's been this confrontational kind of a mindset that is not true of all Muslims by any means, of course, but really is part of the DNA, especially for the Taliban, especially for those that are in Afghanistan and Pakistan and those in the Middle East that even predates Islam. So for them, negotiation is only done from strength. And you only do this when you know you're going to win the negotiation and when the negotiation is going to empower you in a military sense. It's no coincidence that the 5 men they got back are all Taliban military leaders, or people that on one level or another serve their military and their military advance. So I can't but believe that they think that they won this negotiation in a way that's going to empower them in a military way for the future.
No, and 2 of those 5, since we're talking about tribal warfare, 2 of those 5 were at least going to be brought up on war crimes because they went and killed other Shiites. As I've said on this program before, and I know you say it in the book, sometimes the greatest threat to other Muslims are other Muslims. In other words, it isn't just that Muslims kill infidels, Muslims kill Christians, Muslims kill Jews, Muslims kill other Muslims.
That's exactly right. There are 3 categories of Islam, especially for a radical Muslim. There are those that are the true Muslim, and that's the person that believes the tenets that we've been talking about today. There are the infidels, which are the non-Muslims. Then there are the apostate, which are the Muslims who are no longer true Muslims, whether they've converted to Christianity or to something else, or in the mind of a radical Muslim, they're just not radical enough. To their mind, an apostate is worthy of death. And therefore, if you're a Muslim, but you're not as radical as I am, you're not a true Muslim, you're therefore an apostate. And that's why there's been so much violence against other Muslims on the part of the jihadist.
You know, we've talked about the Muslim Brotherhood. We've talked about the difference between Shiite and Sunni. We've talked about the Taliban, but I would be remiss if I did not come back to the other part that you mentioned about Shiite, and that is that 12th Imam and the mindset that is still held by what are called the Twelvers in Iran. Now, not all Iranians are Twelvers, but Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, when he was in power, was one of those. But there is this really interesting sort of subculture of Muslims, and we need to understand that mindset just in terms of our own foreign policy.
We do, because their eschatology for the Twelver, as you say, is really driving their foreign policy. By some measures, as much as 70% of the Shiite world is what we call a Twelver, a person who believes the 12th Imam disappeared in 942, but will come back at the end of history to dominate the world for Islam. They call him the Mahdi. And so you ask, why has the Mahdi not yet appeared? Well, Ahmadinejad told his people, and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who's the real power in Iran even today, tells his people, the reason the Mahdi's not yet appeared is because Islam tolerates the existence of Israel. And so therefore, if Islam would ever attack Israel, the Mahdi would appear to protect Islam from retribution. So we in the West, in our foreign policy, assume we have a kind of mutually assured destruction kind of scenario like we have in the Cold War with the Soviets, where they'd never attack us because they have to know that we would attack them. Well, if the Soviets had a belief in some supernatural figure that would protect them from our retribution, they might have been more willing to launch a first strike.
Yes.
That's some of the behavior that's behind this welfare eschatology, and is the reason that Israel, even as recently as today, declared that Iran is still their public enemy number one.
Wow. So again, we can see why we hear about the great Satan, the United States. The little Satan, of course, is Israel. And those are some things that affect our political scene. But before we run out of time today, I did want to talk about some of the theological issues. And one of the articles that you posted was certainly about what is happening kind of worldwide. As a matter of fact, one of your individuals, Mike Fanning, wrote about Pope Francis, a Jewish rabbi and a Muslim imam. Sounds like a joke, I know, but it's not. And we are seeing attempts to try to blur the distinctions between Christian faith and Muslim faith. And I recognize why some people want to do that, because all three of those religions are religions of the book. All of them believe in Revelation. And so there are some kinds of similarities, but there are stark differences between Christianity and Islam, are there not?
Stark differences. I'm glad you brought that up, Kerby, because one of the real movement that's happening in our postmodern relativistic culture is, since all religions lead up to the same mountain, doesn't matter what you believe so long as you're sincere and tolerant, let's just emphasize what we have in common. We both believe in one God. Muslims have a high view of Jesus. They believe he was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, ascended to heaven, will return at the end of history, and so they have all these things that we would say we have in common, so let's just emphasize those things. Well, Islam absolutely rejects the Trinity. In fact, the Quran expressly teaches them to reject the Trinity. Islam expressly rejects the divinity of Jesus, makes it clear that Jesus was no more than a man. Islam does not believe Jesus died on the cross to pay for our sin. Muslims do not believe that they can be saved by trusting in Christ as their Lord, and so they clearly do not have our understanding of salvation. Jesus said that he was the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by him. Muslims do not come to the Father through the Son. They therefore do not have the way of salvation that we have. And tragically, that is, of course, an eternal difference.
The whole concept of salvation is very different in Islam because, first of all, we would believe in sin. They would believe that Adam fell, but God forgave. So really, there isn't quite the emphasis upon sin. And as a result, there's an emphasis upon works. And so that's why I always say that Ephesians 2:8-9, a very important verse if you're going to share the gospel with a Muslim. But there is this idea that in these 5 pillars of Islam, a very works-oriented salvation, hopefully the fulcrum will come out and you will merit enough good works that Allah will allow you into heaven. That is very different than the gospel.
It is extremely different. As you say, it's works-based as opposed to grace-based. In fact, Muslims will tell you they can't even be sure Muhammad's in heaven. Yes, because no one can know for sure. Yeah. You cannot have eternal security. One of the things that's most attractive to Muslims is the eternal security we have in Christ, and the fact that you can have a grace-based relationship with a God who wants an intimate relationship with you. Muslims do not envision God as having a personal, intimate relationship with them. They see God or Allah as a very distant sort of a figure. They don't see themselves as being able to have personal relationship with him at all because they don't have a sense of grace. They have the sense of a works righteousness, and they simply hope that the good will outweigh the bad, and at the end of history, when they stand in judgment, they hope that they can, on the basis of their works, be admitted into heaven. Well, the good news for a Christian trying to share the gospel is we offer the Muslim the very thing he so desperately wants. He wants to know he'll be in heaven. He wants to know that he can be forgiven, that he can have personal, eternal life. He wants to know that. And here we can offer him this gift that he can't earn but can receive. And when we offer him that grace, then we're giving him what Islam does not offer.
And also a personal relationship with God, because, again, in Islam, Allah is distant, he's capricious, he's unknowable, he reveals himself through his holy prophet, reveals himself through an angel Gabriel, reveals himself maybe through the Quran, but you cannot know him. And this idea that you can call God our Father, which is the Lord's Prayer, must be very intriguing and maybe even emotionally attractive to a Muslim.
That's absolutely been my experience. I've gotten to share the gospel with Muslims in East Malaysia when I was a missionary there. I've gotten to do this across the Middle East, and in Bangladesh, in Cairo, and in Egypt, in Turkey. And every place I go, that's the thing you most want to emphasize. In fact, I was recently in Bangladesh meeting with a group of village imams, and they asked me a fascinating question. The very thing I like to ask them, they asked me, which was, if Jesus, Isa, was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, ascended to heaven, returns at the end of history, how could he be only a man? That was the very question I like to ask them, and they asked me. And so I got to explain to them about his death and his resurrection. My dear friend that was with me went to his computer and showed them a picture of the empty tomb in Israel. We had just been in Israel recently, and we got to explain all of that to them and show them that Isa is not just one of the 6 great prophets. He really is God revealed to us, and that through him they can have a personal relationship. Well, that was news they had never heard in all their lives. They had no idea that God would make himself available like that.
What a great story. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about how this very important presentation that we're talking about today affects you and how you can use this to witness to others. And of course, we'll give you that opportunity to find out more about the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. But we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we are talking once again with Dr. Jim Denison. His book is entitled Radical Islam, and we're pulling a number of articles that have come out through the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. One of those, Jim, I wanted to talk about just for a moment. A Muslim enrolled at a Baptist seminary. Why is this national news? And the reason I wanted to talk about Islam today is for us to have some discernment. We're having more and more people that are trying to blur the distinctions between Christianity and Islam, saying, well, Muslims and Christians worship the same God, and on and on and on. But this was significant, in which you have a doctoral student at a Baptist seminary, which I have very high respect for, but nevertheless, a Muslim at a Baptist seminary where you used to teach.
Quite an interesting story, actually. In fact, I have a master's and a PhD from that particular seminary.
Yes, you do.
That seminary, and taught on their faculty there in philosophy of religion. That seminary for years has been doing digs in the Middle East. And so they had a Muslim that was working on the digs there, got to know the archaeology staff there, faculty, the students really well, wanted to do a PhD in archaeology. And one thing led to another, and he winds up enrolled at this seminary as a doctoral student in archaeology. When this news came to light, the seminary explained that they had done this, knowing that this was what they called a man of peace, and they were hoping that they would be able to lead him to Christ by involving him in their curriculum, in their engagement with students and with faculty. One issue that's behind all of this is more denominational than anything. It happens to be a Baptist seminary, and the way the Southern Baptist Convention organize themselves, they have a thing called a cooperative program that money is given from all of the churches and helps support these 6 seminaries and underwrites a lot of the expense of the students at these seminaries. Well, in order to be a student at the seminary, one must be not only a Christian, but one must be going into vocational Baptist ministry, because the churches are in essence supporting these people that will be their future ministers. And so it's the first time I've heard of, anyway, that one of the Southern Baptist seminaries could have a student who was not only not going to be a Baptist minister, but clearly was not even a Christian. So there were some issues relative to the permission to do that, whether that was itself the propriety of being able to make that decision. The larger issue, of course, had to do with the degree to which this could be misinterpreted by the larger culture as kind of an endorsement of some sort. I know the seminary didn't intend that, of course. In fact, they, as they have said, hoped this would be an evangelistic opportunity for them. But nonetheless, the larger culture that picked this up could see this as the seminary endorsing this person's faith or endorsing Islam, even in a larger sense. And that would not be their intention, but it could be a result.
Well, one of the other pictures that you have here is a billboard that claims Jesus is Muslim, and this, I think, is just illustrative of all sorts of things that are happening in our culture, where it is really key for the listeners to point of view and for Christians at large to have discernment, to make sure that they're thinking biblically about these issues, because there is a real postmodern kind of pluralistic, syncretistic culture, now I've used 3 big words, that are all kind of saying, well, the distinctions don't matter, but they really do.
They absolutely do. I had knee surgery a couple of years ago, and I would assume that the person that did this wouldn't think any procedure would be appropriate. It wouldn't matter what you do because they're all the same. We don't get in our cars and assume that any key will start the car. We don't assume that any road will take us home. We don't assume that any plane will take us to our destination. But when it comes to faith matters, we've bought into the lie. I think it's a satanic lie that it doesn't matter what you believe so long as you're sincere and tolerant. That doesn't work in any other area of our lives, and it especially doesn't work when it comes to our eternal destination.
So it just seems to me that, again, we need to be thinking about these issues, trying to apply a biblical worldview. And in Islam, we've already given people some suggestions on how to witness to Muslims that they might come across, certainly talking about the love of God, a personal relationship with God, clarifying the issue of sin. But sometimes they struggle, as we are talking with our Muslim friends, with this idea of the Trinity, the idea that God could have a partner. And, of course, the Quran teaches that God cannot have a partner. What would you suggest are ways to maybe be more effective in our witness to our Muslim friends, neighbors, and coworkers?
Great. Thank you for that very practical question. Of course, the first thing we do with anybody would be to pray for them, to be asking the Holy Spirit to go ahead of us, to ask the Holy Spirit to prompt us and guide us and put into our minds the things that we are to say and do. Second, we build relationship. And that, of course, is true with anybody. We earn the right to be heard. A friend once told me, I have no right to preach the gospel to a hungry person. And so we meet felt need to meet spiritual need. Jesus healed blind eyes to heal blind souls. And so we're developing a relationship and looking for needs that we can meet and earning the right to begin to share our faith with this person so that they will believe it's because we care about them that we're doing this. We're not looking for converts. We're not looking for numbers. We absolutely care about their soul, and we have to earn the right to do that. And then third, we want to anticipate their objections. You just highlighted the most important objection, which is the Trinity. The Quran actually specifically says one should not say Trinity, desist, it will be better for you, and believes that the Trinity itself is heresy. They believe God is one, and they think that we worship three gods. And so what I've always said to Muslims when we've had these conversations, first of all, God's bigger than I am. He's a mystery. If I could fully understand the nature of God, he wouldn't be God. I'm glad I can't fully understand him, that my finite fallen mind can't fully understand him. But second, we believe just as you do that God is one. Jesus believed God is one. Jesus was asked, what's the great commandment? He started with the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one God. Love the Lord with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The Trinity are three ways in which this one God manifests himself. They are three factors of the one personality, as it were. I can be a father, a son, and a brother, and still be one. Well, so it is God can be one who reveals himself in three persons. It is a mystery, no doubt, but again, I'm glad that God is himself mysterious. But then I want to say to the Muslim, but really the larger question, that the mystery of the nature of God himself is the question, where will you spend eternity? Where are you going to be? Here's what Jesus offers you. Here's what the Holy Spirit offers you right now. If you'll ask him to, he'll forgive all your mistakes and failures. He will give you the eternal life you're so seeking. Jesus, Isa, whom you believe in, will make you the child of God in a way that no law and no regulation ever could. What you're seeking, you can have, and you can have it right now. You can know God today, not just hopefully when you die, but right now. And let me help you know how to know him, and then hopefully we get a chance to help them pray to trust Christ.
And again, when you're pointing them to Jesus, you're talking about someone in the Quran who was born of a virgin, who is a prophet, who is the Messiah, who was sinless. Even Muhammad himself was not sinless. So there are some ways, even using their Quran, to get their attention, and then you can take them to the scriptures because they're given the permission to read the before books, the books before, and then the power of God's word in their lives. So,
and you trust the Holy Spirit to work. And then there are visions and dreams happening. More Muslims have come to Christ in the last 15 years than the previous 15 centuries. Right. You're praying for your Muslim friend. You're asking God to reveal himself to this person. They believe in visions and dreams. They believe that's how the Quran was first transmitted to Muhammad, through a kind of a vision. And so they're very open to visions and dreams. And now Isa, or Jesus, is doing what no human can, and revealing himself to Muslims the world over. I've met Muslims in Bangladesh and the Middle East and Southeast Asia who've had these visions and dreams. The book of Acts, remarkable manifestations as God is working in the Muslim world.
And again, if people want more information, you have white papers, you have podcasts, you have articles, you have books, and of course the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture, so people can find out more by going to your website. So thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
What a great privilege to do this with you, Kerby. I'm so grateful for what you do and for how you do it.
Let's do it. Well, I know you enjoyed that interview. It's always great to have Jim Denison in studio with us, and just a great opportunity for us to hear from him. We give you some links to his website and to the great material that he is producing on a regular basis, so please take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net, as you will find out more about him and about us. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, this is a great opportunity for you as well to maybe listen to the interview again. You can go to the website pointofview.net and download the podcast or the livecast so that you can listen to it or watch it. And of course, I also encourage you to find out a little bit more about what we are making available to you. We produce a number of videos that you will certainly want to watch. We also post videos from other individuals that are things that you might want to actually have as your resource, or to maybe post on your Facebook page or your web page. So just lots of great material there as well. Need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation and give you a chance to join the conversation. The website again is pointofview.net. Join us then, and we'll be back right after these important messages.
From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. In theaters August 28th. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
Have you ever wanted to walk where Jesus walked? To stand in places where the Apostle Paul proclaimed the gospel and saw the world and people's lives changed? In May of 2016, you can do just that on a 15-day tour of Israel and Greece with Point of View's very own Kerby Anderson. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to experience the Bible and history in places God chose to begin the spread of his message of grace. Join Kerby and Point of View for Journey to Jerusalem and Journeys of Paul. Learn more by clicking on the banner at pointofview.net. You've read the Bible, here's a chance to live it. pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about the issue of artificial reproduction. This is a topic we've addressed from time to time here on Point of View. And on the one hand, we'd certainly have to say that any new technology that is allowing us to treat and cure male or female infertility is a good thing. It is an issue that we're certainly going to have to deal with more and more in the 21st century. I say oftentimes when I speak to pastors in a seminary class that if you look out over your congregation, maybe about 10% of the couples that are married may be dealing with an issue of infertility. But we're going to deal with one of the very strong concerns that people have about artificial reproduction in terms of how it threatens the sanctity of human life or the moral integrity of the family. In particular, what about surrogate parenting? And this is why we wanted to give you an opportunity to know about a series of films. The third has just come out, called Breeders, a Subclass of Women, and it is something that has come from the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. The president is Jennifer Lahl, and she is with us. She has been involved very much in not only producing this film, but previous ones, Exploitation, about the ethics of human egg donation, as well as Anonymous Father's Day, about men and women that are created by anonymous sperm donors. So we're going to get into all of those issues. You might remember one of the other films that she worked on as an associate producer called Lines That Divide, the Great Stem Cell Debate. So lots of issues we can talk about today. Jennifer is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. She also serves on the North American editorial board for the International Journal of Ethics and Medicine. Also serves on the board of reference for Johnny Erickson Tada's Christian Institute on Disability. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby, for having me.
We have on our website here the 2-minute trailer that is on this new film, Breeders. I would encourage all of our listeners to watch it, then hit the share button and put it on your Facebook page, send it to individuals, put it on a blog if you have a blog, educate others about this issue. It will really start a dialogue that I think many people will appreciate. I've also taken the time to post an article about the films that you've been involved with, and of course have a link to your website. But maybe give us a little bit of the history. This latest one, called Breeders, is really the third of a trilogy of films. Take us through each one for just a minute before we get into that one, just so that people understand some of the great resources that would be available to them that they can use in their church, in their Christian school, and maybe even help other people think through some of the ethical implications of some of these new artificial technologies.
Sure. Thank you for giving me such a great introduction, too, and a platform to speak about things that I really don't think we're wrestling deeply with at all in our churches. I often ask religious audiences when I'm before them, how many have heard a sermon recently preached on the barren womb and infertility in light of these 21st century modern technologies? So I've been writing and speaking and traveling around the world for over 12 years, speaking about assisted reproductive technology and specifically what's called third-party reproduction, which is where you use egg and or sperm and or womb from an outside party member. So, our first film we made was on egg donation or egg selling. You cannot do human cloning or embryonic stem cell research without eggs, because eggs are necessary for making embryos to do research on and also for doing human cloning research. And because of my graduate work and studies in bioethics, these are issues that are very much a part of our organization. So I was meeting and speaking to so many women that I'd met that made the decision to sell their eggs because they had student loan debt, because they were low income. They saw the ad saying, be an angel, help somebody, make dreams come true, all this altruistic, loving language. And they were seriously harmed. In my previous career, I was a nurse for 20-plus years, so I was really concerned with the health issues. And when exploitation came out, I started hearing from donor-conceived people. We call them, the U.S. Census has a new category. Are you donor-conceived?
Donor-conceived, yeah.
Because so we made Anonymous Father's Day, which tells the story of what it's like not knowing who your biological father is. And then to complete the series, we had to, of course, tell the story of surrogacy. Surrogacy is in the Bible, so it's a topic that we have total permission to talk about. And infertility is in the Bible, so we should, be wrestling with these issues. And through documentary filmmaking and telling stories, we've been able to really have an impact in educating and informing people.
Yes, when people hear that, they go, it's in the Bible? Yeah, well, Abraham and Sarah certainly fits into the surrogate. Infertility, Hannah. So we certainly, whether we're talking about Genesis or 1 Samuel or what other passages, certainly are going to get into those. But again, I think that I want to emphasize, because I know as we open up the phones, there are going to be people calling in saying, well, are you against all these technologies? No, I mean, anything that can treat or cure, let's in this case look at female infertility, that does not require us to destroy embryos, does not bring a third party into the pregnancy. Those are things that I think are permissible, although, again, some Christians might have questions about that. But we're talking about something that is far beyond this, and it's a good illustration that I think when I wrote my first book on genetic engineering, 32 years ago, that makes me feel really old, back in 1982 when genetic engineering came out, I at the time was saying that the technology is moving faster than the legal precedents and faster than the legislatures to catch up. Well, now, 3 decades later, we still have that problem because as I watch your film, it seems to me that in many cases, we still have surrogate mothers out there in kind of legal limbo, don't we?
That's absolutely true. And in our film, we sort of tease out the implications of what happens when making a baby gets, sort of resolved within legal contracts, and what people are told they have to do or they don't have to do. Like one surrogate in the film was told she had to terminate the pregnancy, have an abortion, because the child she was carrying was diagnosed with a disability. And she really struggled with that because she felt that she had this little boy's life in her hands, and it was her body and it was her decision. But, she was told by the people who were paying her, basically, you work for us, we hired you for a job, you do what we tell you to do. So it is very complicated. And not only are our laws lagging behind and not keeping up, nor is our theological understanding of these issues and our ability as Christians to think critically about what does it mean to, hire another woman or to buy eggs or sperm from somebody else to have a child.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll come back and continue our conversation for a few minutes. And then, of course, as always, open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. Jennifer Lahl with us today. She is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. And we are talking about the latest film, which we have a trailer for on our website, Breeders, a Subclass of Women. But let me mention, it's the third of a trilogy. Earlier ones, Eggsploitation, as well as Anonymous Father's Day. And we will get into the aspects of this, but also, of course, we will open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We certainly recognize the issue of infertility, recognize it's important for us to do what we can to provide children for those of you that certainly want them, but we have ethical questions. We'll talk about that right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Over the last few years, there have been a number of attacks on our nation's national motto, In God We Trust. Recently, I had Representative Randy Forbes on my program to talk about these attacks and the victories that often we haven't heard about on most of the mainstream media. A few years ago, a bureaucrat at the Department of Veterans Affairs attempted to ban the flag-folding recitations at military funerals. This phrase was considered inappropriate and unconstitutional. May God grant you grace, mercy, and peace. A funeral home was told by government officials they could not even inform the families that they have the option of requesting prayer at the military services performed by the Veterans Honor Details. The U.S. Mint attempted to remove the inscription, In God We Trust, from the front of the new presidential coin. The traditional inscriptions of E Pluribus Unum and In God We Trust were moved to the edge of the coins. The architect of the Capitol refused a teenager's request that a certificate noting his grandfather's love of God, country, and family accompany a souvenir flag that had been flown over the building. The 17-year-old Eagle Scout was told that the word God could not be put on the certificate because it violated a policy banning religious and political expressions on the certificates. Fortunately, in each of these cases, the policies were changed. Representative Forbes even commented that it was good that people on radio were hearing about these victories because they're rarely reported in the media. He then went on to mention another victory. Last month, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts upheld the constitutionality of the phrase, Under God, in the Pledge of Allegiance. There have been at least 3 failed attempts to challenge Under God in the Pledge. There's sure to be additional challenges, but for now, the phrases like, One nation under God, and In God we trust, appear secure. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking today with Jennifer Lahl, president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. And I might just mention that this particular film, Breeders, a Subclass of Women, raises really vital questions about surrogacy and takes you through the experience of 4 women and some of the unexpected consequences and even the heart-wrenching emotions that they had to deal with. And I want to go through each one of those, Jennifer. But before we do, let's back up for just a minute and talk about the other women, the couple that wants the child. When, as I mentioned a minute ago, I wrote a book years ago, decades ago now, on genetic engineering. I expected that when my book came out that there would be all sorts of questions about gene splicing, because that was the primary emphasis in the book, and I put some additional chapters on artificial reproduction, especially since we'd had our first in vitro baby that had been born. I was completely caught off guard because my phone began to ring, and it wasn't from people raising questions about genetics. It was from couples who were infertile that wanted to know what was possible, either morally or just even technologically. And I remember at the time, so many of these sort of modern day Hannahs were saying, I will do anything to have a child. And it does seem to me that that's part of what drives this problem, this desire to have a child at any cost, and this desire to, as in a sense, exploit others, not intentionally, probably unintentionally, but that exploitation that you document in the film goes back to this sheer desire, which is an admirable desire to have children, that maybe drives this whole industry. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and I do see that. You'll hear women talk about, desperation and grief and loss, and those are all, real, legitimate feelings. But as I read Scripture, I like to say, in the garden, when the creation account was finished and God called everything good, there was just Adam and Eve, and they were a complete couple. Adam needed a helpmate, and he got Eve, and, it was wonderful. And children are a blessing, and children are a gift. And sometimes we think we have a right, or we're entitled to, or we have to have a gift. Well, it's not a gift if, you have to have it, as you say, at any cost. And that's the problem when we start seeing people in that desperation, willing to sort of go outside of moral bounds to do whatever and to push those limits because they so desperately want that child. And God hasn't given it to them for whatever reason. We could talk about the reasons for infertility,
sure,
which are many, but I think we have to just stop and pause, and I think that's where the church's role is perhaps missing in just really educating into sort of the life of the church. When you get up, when you lay down, when you walk alongside the road, talk about the fact that some couples will be barren. For whatever reason, God has other things planned for them. He doesn't have children planned for them, or children in the natural way that couples often have children. Maybe he has children planned through adoption, or through foster parenting, or through being, wonderful aunts, or running children's ministry. I mean, God gives us children in all different ways, but how can we stop and sort of reflect instead of what I say, get on that super highway that the in vitro fertilization track puts you on, because you're letting desperation sort of drive your decision making, and you are willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars pursuing these very costly and highly ineffective, with high failure rates, technologies.
Sure. You mentioned the reason for infertility. There are many, and I thought we might mention that for just a minute before we get into the story of these four women, and that is sometimes congenital abnormalities, hormonal changes, low-level gynecological infections. There are a lot of reasons why you are seeing a fairly significant number of women who are infertile and are looking for alternatives in order to have a child.
Yes, and we live in a more modern day society now, so women and men are waiting later to have children, and we've realized that the biological clock is a reality, and our fertile days really are numbered, and we're not, we can't necessarily wait until later in our 30s as we often thought we could, and we had plenty of time. Obesity. We have a huge problem with obesity in Western countries, and obesity really drives infertility in both men and women. There's infertility for just reasons we don't know. I mean, the couples will go through all the diagnostic workups, and the doctors will come back and say, we don't know why you can't reproduce. We can't find anything wrong, but for some reason you can't. So part of my work is just sort of, doing that education that, how do we understand what happens when children don't come, and what do we do with all the cafeteria choices that modern technology waves out as the answer to your problem?
If you'd like to join us, since calls are already coming in, 1-800-351-1212. Jennifer Lahl with us as we talk with her. She is with the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. We have a link to the website. We have an article about this new film and also documents the previous ones, and most importantly, the video that I would encourage you to watch and maybe hit that share button, put it on your Facebook page, your blog, or to send it to others. Let's talk briefly before we take some phone calls about these women. I'll take of the child born through surrogate parenting first. You have that story about her. And you would think, well, a child would be grateful to be born into the world, but whether you were born into the world because of a contract that brought you into being, or back to the anonymous Father's Day where you're born into the world and you will never know who your father is, there are some psychological effects to that, are there not?
Yes, and you're speaking of Jessica, who's just a beautiful young woman in the film, and I just came to love and admire her greatly in getting to know her and making the film. And she was born of what is called a traditional surrogacy arrangement, and there was a contract. Her mother and father were infertile, and so they hired, another woman in the state of Michigan to have a baby for them. And she talks about just how complicated that was for her growing up. She never really felt connected to her mother, who raised her in the home. She didn't find out until she was a teenager that this was even her story, although she was, as you often hear with kids adopted, when they're finally told, they kind of go, oh, I knew it all along, now it finally makes sense, the pieces sort of fall into place. Secrets are just very devastating on families and children. So as a teenager, she, was sort of rustling through some papers at home because she had to find a health document for, a PE class at school, and that's how she discovered when she was in her 30s, she finally met and found her birth mother, or her real mother, her first mother, whatever. There's all kinds of language for what we have to call these women now. And it's been really a rocky road for her because she's spoken out against the practice. And as you say, people say, well, why aren't you grateful? If not for this, you wouldn't be here. But, we could say the same thing to somebody who was born a product of rape. They don't have to necessarily endorse rape, but if not for the rape, they wouldn't be here.
Sure.
And so that her speaking out against the practice has sort of disenfranchised her from her family because they're saying, well, why aren't you just happy?
Yeah, very powerful stories. Let me take one more, and then we'll take a break and then come back and take some calls and work our way through it. But you have another individual that was the surrogate mother who honestly just thought I was doing this to help another couple. But as you alluded to just a minute ago, there's kind of you're kind of like, you're a hired breeder. You're kind of like, a reproductive slave. I'm maybe using a little bit of hyperbole here, but the impact that this has had on the surrogate mothers, many of who, interestingly enough, I did not know until your video, are in the military and, of course, have had children before, feel very exploited by the system that we have today, and there don't seem to be a whole lot of laws that protect them and their circumstances. True?
Absolutely, and this is the same experience we've had with the release of the earlier two films. As soon as the film comes out, more people come forward and tell us their stories. And so there's so many of these women that truly went into it to help somebody. One woman we interviewed was helping a family member, a brother and his wife. Another woman was helping a really good friend. And so these are people that had relationships already together and really went into it with this strong desire to help a couple who otherwise couldn't have a child. And things went terribly wrong, things that you could never anticipate going wrong, things that you could never say, well, we just need better contracts, and as long as the contract language is so, clear, because there's so much that happens. God teaches us that we've been knit together in our mother's womb. And there's so much that happens with mothers and children in utero, in bonding, that's good and wonderful and should be nurtured and encouraged. And we can't anticipate what it's going to be like to carry that child for all that long period of time and then just give the child away.
Well, we're going to take a Okay, let's just take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. But I did want to mention that as you go to our website, pointofview.net, you're going to find a lot of different articles. Might feature, first of all, our 15-day tour of Israel and Greece. And if you have always wanted to go to the Holy Land, that would be a great opportunity for you to join with us. It's less expensive than it's ever been before, and I'm just really excited about this opportunity. Of course, you can find my viewpoint section there as well. We do have our Take Action section. And of course, we have posted a number of videos for you to watch as well. So all of it available at the website pointofview.net. You can find out more about our author and her book, as well as some other great resources. So again, take the time to visit the website pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
How long have you been listening to Point of View? If this is your first day or two, you get a pass. This one isn't for you. But if you've been around a while, I have a question. Have you ever donated to support what we do? If not, why not? Maybe you really don't know. You never seriously thought about it. Well, please think about it. In fact, take action. Do it now. If you keep coming back, you obviously get something from the program. You've heard how people's lives have been transformed and energized to make a difference. And the only way that we can be here tomorrow and next month and next year is if you break that cycle and give. Please, you can likely do more, but act today and give at least $5. $5. Sure, if you can do 50, do it. If you can do 100, do that. But at least 5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
glorify with all my life. Let your glory shine down. Let your glory shine down.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, we're privileged to have with us Jennifer Lahl. She is the president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. You can go to that website there and find out a great deal about what we are talking about today, and in particular focusing on this particular new documentary called Breeders. And really the legality of surrogacy is kind of a hot button issue right now. There are various states that either have or will consider legislation, from New York to Louisiana. I know the District of Columbia has had some considerations as well. So a lot of states are dealing with this issue. And if you would like to know a little bit more about this, we first of all encourage you to go to that website, which we have a link to on our website. We also have an opportunity for you to also watch the trailer. It's about 2 minutes long for Breeders, a subclass of women, and see if indeed that would be something you would want to know more about, or certainly also hit that share button and pass that on to others. Jennifer, talk about some of the resources that are available, because we've mentioned that this is the third of 3 different films, and if listeners wanted to purchase one for their own personal use, maybe put it in their church library, maybe make it available to a Christian school, whatever they might want to do, pass it on to other doctors. What are the resources that you might have available to some of our listeners today?
Sure. Well, obviously the films are all available for purchase and are video on demand, so if people don't like to buy DVDs, they just like to watch films on their computers, they can do that. Exploitation has just been picked up and it's going to be released all over the world on iTunes and Netflix next month. We also developed a study guide that goes with the whole entire 3-film series. You can use them separately if you only want to show one particular, or you can, show the whole series. But it actually walks you through some questions for discussion, and raises some concerns, and just helps to lead and facilitate a discussion. We also have maps on our website, so if you're wondering, what does the law in your particular state say about surrogacy, or can you sell your eggs, here. I live in the state of California, which is where I'm calling from right now. I like to refer to my state as the Wild, Wild West. Anything goes. Elton John came to California twice to have his babies via surrogacy and egg donation. Octomom obviously gave birth here. All the Hollywood celebrities that use surrogates. So if you are just interested in what's happening in your particular state, we have resources like that available. Plus, we just write regularly on the topic of assisted reproductive technologies.
So again, Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. We have a link to the website. And let's, if we can, take some phone calls as we move our way through this conversation today. We'll start in the state of Texas, KJRT. Christy, thank you for calling today.
Hi, Kerby. Hi, Jennifer. I just wanted to throw this out to you, and that is, as far as the Christian community is concerned, what about the concept of our faith and believing God to have a child? Taking God's word, just like, Abraham and Sarah, they had to take what God had given them as his word to them and say, you know what? And I always love the fact that the Lord even waited until neither one of them could really do anything anymore. I mean, it was done, and that's when they had Isaac, and I think to myself, as Christians, we should be one step above what the world is doing and what they're thinking and how they're operating. And we should be taking what we want out of the kingdom of God, out of the resources of heaven, and that way people who are in the world, who are in that situation, they'll look at us and say, wow, you wanted to have a child and you did it. How did you do it? And that's an opportunity to not only help someone in that area, but lead them into the kingdom, bring them to Jesus Christ. I mean, I think so often that we've gotten so sucked into the way the world thinks and what they do and how they do things, and And we've stepped so far away from the Word of God sometimes, it's getting serious.
Well, good
You know what I
points. Yeah. Great admonition, Christy. Thank you for starting us off there, because that is certainly an issue. You just mentioned a minute ago that there are some that will say, well, yeah, I can't have a child. Two homosexual men, you just mentioned Elton John, said, well, I've got to use a surrogate mother in some way or another, so at least I have a child that's genetically related to one of us. But that just, again, is an attempt by the culture to circumvent what God intended. And some of these get so convoluted. I remember, for example, the court case. I remember last time I was at Baylor Law School, we were debating the one about this woman that wanted to take some of the frozen embryos and implant them in her after they had been divorced, and the husband brought suit because he said, I don't want you to have any more children because according to the way the laws are written, even though we're not married anymore, those would still be biologically my children, but those are babies on ice. And you've had the baby M's and all these other situations where William and Elizabeth Stern hired an individual to actually have a child, and then in the New Jersey courts had to sort these out. These surrogate and egg donation cases get so convoluted, and there really isn't too much of an ethical framework because the Bible always assumed that the children born were biologically related to the father and mother, with the exception of adoption. Now we're mixing and matching sperm and egg and wombs and everything else. I don't think the laws will ever be able to make any sense out of it, and we certainly have gone far beyond what I think would be some of the biblical basis for those ethical decisions in the first place. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I just think that, we do need to, hit the pause button. People always ask me, how do you keep from getting discouraged? And I think, well, this is just the way the world goes. That doesn't mean we throw in the towel and raise the white flag, and as your caller to say, we just start acting like the world. I mean, we don't have to use the technologies just because they're available.
Right.
I mean, we have massive educational programs telling people not to smoke cigarettes. We don't throw people in jail and criminalize cigarette smoking, but we sure work really hard saying this isn't the best thing for you. Don't do this. I think similarly in the case of assisted reproductive technology, everybody has some cross that they have to bear. We know single people that don't feel called to a life of singleness and celibacy, but that's where God has them. And so they have to learn to accept where they are and to be grateful for what God has for them. It might be something different. We don't always all get the same exact thing, and we don't always get what we want. So how do we say no to these technologies which seem so pervasive? We have almost 750,000 frozen human embryos in the United States.
That's right.
We need to just, stop freezing the image of God. I mean, isn't the image of God in its tiny beginning stage more worthy of a dignity that's not just plops it into the freezer? But again, because we're not thinking, we're not being challenged to think, and we're being motivated by desperation and feeling like, well, God says to be fruitful and multiply. I'm being disobedient, and I have to use this technology so I can be fruitful and multiply. So I'm just thankful for this opportunity to be on your program and talk to your listeners.
Well, certainly something we've talked about a little bit in the past, and I appreciate you doing such a great job through these documentaries, pointing out some of the concerns that should be front and center to all citizens, but most importantly to our state legislators. You're from California. Let's go to a caller in California listening on KYCC. Jack, thank you for calling today.
Thanks for taking my call. Jennifer, I wanted to throw a couple of things at you. I spoke with a guy who shared with me, and I've heard this kind of subject on Point of View before, about China's gender ratio problem, where they have basically 40 million bare branches, 40 million excess of males. And the gentleman that I spoke to, he suggested, along the lines of the topic you're talking about, he said, well, why don't we just start doing sex selection? Because he said anthropologically, biologically, in nature, 105 males are born per 100 women. That's the natural ratio of male to female. You can look that up on any scholarly study online with gender ratio. And his suggestion was that, okay, well, since this is going on, we've got this problem. What is morally wrong with? He explained to me that the sperm, there's two kinds to dumb it down. Basically, he said there's two kinds. There's the one that swims fast, and when that one fertilizes the egg, it produces the male child. The one that swims slower, when it makes it to fertilization, that produces the female. And he says he didn't believe that it would be playing God to select the sex of the child. I'd like to know how you feel about that. And I'd like to hear some comments about gender ratio problems that I believe is being exacerbated by immigration policies in America, where it tends to be that when immigrants are allowed to come in greater numbers, it's usually males that migrate to America, and they're also driving up those ratios. So if you could comment on those, I appreciate it.
Take a break. Be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jennifer Lahl with us for a few more minutes as we are talking today about artificial reproductive technology. president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. And if you just joined us, been talking about this new film coming out, Breeders, a Subclass of Women, which really, in a sense, completes a trilogy about the ethics of third-party reproduction. Some of the earlier ones we mentioned, Exploitation, which was about the ethics of human egg donation, as well as Anonymous Father's Day, about women and men created by an anonymous sperm donor. Jack asked a good question. Let me give some basic biology, Jennifer, and that is that a woman contributes an X chromosome. A male contributes either an X or a Y. An XY would be a male, an XX would be a female. There seems to be some evidence that Y sperm travel differently than X sperm, so putting it through a gel electrophoresis or other things, you would move the ratio from 50-50, not to 100-0, but I've heard some people say maybe you could change the ratio from to 80-20, 70-30, something like that. That, first of all, would bring you to, if indeed somebody wanted to do that, you'd have to use artificial insemination by the husband. And, there's nothing necessarily morally improper about that, although I know people in the Catholic Church believe even that intervention would be inappropriate. But you're talking about separating X sperm from Y sperm. That's very different than destroying an embryo or a fetus. So from a technological point of view, it is possible. From a moral point of view, it is possible. I just don't know in China whether they're ready to do that. And we've had programs in this program where we've talked about the incredible kind of sex selection by abortion that has taken place in China. And we've seen the devastating results in which you have a much higher ratio of men to women in China because of the one-child policy. But any moral questions you might want to raise about that, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think, Jack raised a lot of really important points about this whole movement in assisted reproductive technology. I mean, actually, gender selection, it's not even, I wouldn't call it abortion, perhaps, but it's happening in the laboratory when you're mixing egg and sperm and creating the embryos right there in the laboratory. True. Because they're always tested. And couples are asked, do you want us to implant, 2 or 3? Do you want us to implant the boys or the girls? Do you want one of each? There's a great book out there called Unnatural Selection, which really is doing a good job is crunching the numbers of what's happening outside in China, in particular in India, where, boys are preferred over girls. But in fact, it happens here. And it's again, one of the cafeteria menu options when a couple finds himself in the IVF clinic. Do you want a girl or a boy? Because we can pick. We have that technology available to us. Some would say, are we playing God here? Have we lost sight of the fact that children are a gift and a blessing, and you don't get to pick your gifts. It's not a gift if you pick it. It's something you pick. C.S. Lewis's great essay, The Abolition of Man, talks about the man molders. I mean, here we are tinkering with people to the point where we have these unnatural gender balances. China's going to predict that in just a short time they're going to have a huge HIV/AIDS epidemic because there's not going to be enough women to go around for men, and then that will just increase, sexual promiscuity and visiting brothels, and all these unintended consequences when we think we are wise in our own eyes and can do these things without thinking deeply about them and thinking, long term.
One of the things we do around this round table every once in a while is do a conversation about science fiction films. And the reason I do that is sometimes they are probably the best way to illustrate some of those issues. And one of those that we talked about recently was Gattaca. Now, for some of our younger listeners, they're going to say, I've never heard of that film, because it's somewhat an older film. But at the same time, I think it did a very good job of raising these questions, because what you have is the first child that was born by the old-fashioned way, the back seat of a car, basically, is the implication they give there. So then the next child, they go to the clinic and they select for intelligence, athletic ability. They can even select for musical ability. They can even determine the sex or the gender of the child, and that is then the sort of new, improved way. And the whole film kind of takes you through, should we be so manipulating children as sort of a consumer product, Or is there some wisdom in, as we talked about with Christy just a few minutes ago and some of the other callers that wanted to get on, do we want to trust God? And should we, as you said, see children as a gift or as a parental plaything? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, and certainly one of the things that surfaces in the films that you've produced.
Right, and I do encourage all your listeners, I don't know if you're young, you've got to watch Gattaca. I mean, it's a great Uma Thurman, Ethan Hawke film, and when I watched Gattaca when it first came out, it really was science fiction. But Gattaca gives us a good idea of how fast this technology is coming, because if you watch Gattaca today, we're there. I mean, all the things that they talked about in this science fiction movie is happening today, and it's mainstream. It's not even anybody's questioning. Should we test for eye color? Should we test for Down syndrome? Should we test for sex? A professor at Stanford Law says that in 50 years, all babies will be made in the laboratory because who's going to want to leave anything to chance?
Wow.
Which is the message of Gattaca. Why leave your children's, creation to chance? I mean, that, of course, ignores God, and God isn't chance. I mean, if we get a child that has a disability or that is, heaven forbid, imperfect, it's not that we left things to chance.
Yeah, I think it's just an illustration of the conflict of worldviews, because if you believe that everything you see around us is a result of chance, then certainly intelligent scientists in the laboratory can drive the engine of evolution. As one wag said, well, we can, with this new technology, rewrite the 5th and 6th days of creation and creating new forms of life. But then you'd also say, well, certainly informed doctors in the laboratory can make sure that we give you the best child, a perfect child, rather than leaving it to chance. And if, again, that's your evolutionary worldview, that's going to lead you that way. But if instead you believe that God is in control and we are living in a fallen world, so certainly we can treat and cure infertility, treat and cure genetic diseases, but still we recognize that we want to understand that we are living in a world that is under God's control. It's a very different kind of worldview. So you have raised some great questions in these films. Just before I let you go, let's again talk about the resources that are available at the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network.
Well, yes, like I said, we have films. You can see a lot of our films. You can watch them online, or you can purchase them if you have a DVD library you want to build out. We have teaching study guide materials that go with each of our films, legislative maps if you want to know what's going on in your particular state, and just a weekly email newsletter. We're very active on Twitter and Facebook, so there's no reason why, if you want information about this topic, you can't find it readily at your fingertips.
Well, Jennifer, I appreciate you taking the time to produce these films. Again, it's a trilogy, in case somebody has just joined us. Exploitation, Anonymous Father's Day, and, of course, the new one is just out, Breeders, a Subclass of Women. And I appreciate you taking the time to not only produce those films and some of the ones you've done in the past, like the great stem cell debate, but I also appreciate you giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, hope you enjoyed the interview. This has been a good 2 hours of program today, and just wanted to encourage you one last time before we say goodbye to visit the website, pointofview.net. There's a place where you can find information about the interviews that we've done here, and I would encourage you to go there. And also, if you would like to listen to this interview again, I certainly encourage you to click on the button there that gives you a chance to download the podcast, and that way you can listen to it or even get the live cast and watch it, and maybe even pass it on to some others. So that is one of the features we make available to you, and we would encourage you to do so. Of course, go to the Viewpoint section. My daily commentary is available to you, and you can have it delivered to your inbox. Simply click on that button there as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have our 15-day tour of Israel and Greece, so hope that you'll visit pointofview.net to check all of that out. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
What can you get for $5? In most cases, you can't even get a value meal at a fast food restaurant. But I'll tell you one thing $5 can do. If every listener to Point of View sent just $5 this week, believe it or not, and someone here did the math, Point of View could pay the bills for the next 3 years. That's what the number said. $5, 3 years. That's how many of you there are and how little it takes to keep us going. The problem is, most of our listeners have never contributed. Never. To make up for those who don't, others give large gifts, hundreds, even thousands, or monthly donations of $30, $65, $100. I don't know what you can do, but I encourage you to do what you can today, even if that's $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for doing your part for Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day.